Rough Justice 84 is a time management strategy game that released on March 13th, 2023 on the PC, specifically Steam and GOG. It costs $19.99 and takes you into a world of corruption, scandal, and spy-like shenanigans. While my playtime with the game indicates 66 hours on Steam, it's more like 30 and 40, as idling and leaving the game on happened a little bit, but I did beat the game before finishing this review. So, the game puts you in the shoes of Jim Baylor, a rising up-and-coming cop of Seneca City, who's fighting crime as best as he can, and probably is the cousin of Jim Gordon, given his looks. Sadly, as he really starts to make a difference in the city, he gets framed for a crime himself and goes to prison. However, it's proven later on that it was a fraud, and Jim leaves jail to a much different world. A newly passed law allows for more business-like transactions when it comes to dealing with crime and crime-adjacent issues. And one of Jim's closest friends and former partners, Hank, has started up one, and he wants you to become the leader of it. I mean, in his eyes, you were the super cop after all. This leads to the main gameplay loop. At base, you'll be introduced to handlers that will give you jobs to do in a various 4 types, such as security type jobs in detail, and repossession cases that always seem to be a car for some reason. In order to do these tasks, however, you have to first hire agents who are basically your chess pieces on the board. These agents have 5 stats: strength, intelligence, perception, reflexes, and empathy. They also have a number of action points, which are used to go and do tasks and travel, and when they have 0 left, they'll have to go home, and you'll have to replace the agent with someone else. Each agent has a unique biography and picture, and can level up with completing tasks, earning more stats, and even a unique perk along the way. At these tasks, you'll be given a short synopsis of the task at hand. These explanations will give you a hint of how to succeed with the stats in question in 3 of the 4 different case types. So you'll want to deploy the appropriate agents to them, and when they get there in these types of quests, you'll get a choice between 2 different options. In most cases, you'll have to pass a dice test in order to succeed, whether it be getting a 4+ on a series of dice, or a run of dice like a Yahtzee straight, giving you a couple of rerolls to try to actually get the values. The number of dice will be based on your skill points. The higher your skill points, the more likely you're going to get more dice, and can also be enhanced with gear that you can buy to give you more dice or do other various effects with the dice. You can also buy additional dice with energy, but they are limited and they do cost a bit in terms of getting 2 or 3 dice, so you'll want to use it sparingly or when you really need to. The game makes a good first impression with the system, as the game is well balanced in the opening, as your choices feel meaningful and lets the randomization come into play properly. It was always a great feeling when using the dice and energy well enough to barely scrape by in a challenge, knowing that you didn't overpay for the results while still succeeding, allowing your agent to save precious energy to get another task or 2 out of them before they went home. There was enough failure, however, in the opening hours, even with the best of agents, as a bad dice roll or 2 would happen and you would fail missions. It helps that the little flavor text does a good job of giving reasons for the failure or success, and helps immerse you in the world overall. Each successful mission gives you money, experience, and reputation on a particular handler, who has their own levels that you can level up, giving you tougher missions and miscellaneous perks down the road. You do need to realize early on that leveling up one handler and doing a specific set of missions does have downsides, especially with making progress in the story. Their levels are usually the gates to the story section. By the way, of course there are story missions as well, as they usually have lower requirements to succeed, but more on that later. In this early game, this is where the game truly shines, especially from the roleplay aspect, as each of the missions and characters really feel of the era for the most part, as it's really helped by the 80s music setting the mood in the background. You do feel like a beat cop on the old shows like Columbo and MacGyver, taking on the filthy underbelly of the city, and all to the beat of what is pretty great music. Listen to what I'm talking about here.
On it. Location reached.
It also helps that the characters and writing in the early going really do capture the era as well for the most part. Whether it be Lynn, the young woman trying to make a name of herself despite the pressures of society for her to just settle down, or Willie, the ruffian who seemingly has loyalty and yet a heart of gold. It all feels well crafted, and the game early on makes it clear that you aren't 100% a good guy, and I really did appreciate this angle on the gameplay. You'll retake cars that people have missed payment on, or even be asked to scare some local kids who are playing Dungeons & Dragons, calling back to elements of satanic panic. The game's presentation in general, even with its limited artwork and area, does take advantage of its neon colorization for things like the dice rolls, and does make the game stand out from other games like this from a character standpoint, but it's also functional as well. Well, in most cases. Sometimes you do have a situation where you try to click on something that has two things on it, and that can get annoying. Moving back to the gameplay a little bit, there's that fourth mission type I didn't talk about, which is where you get specific mini-games to complete, and it helps to bring well-needed variety to the strategy element of the game. These mini-games hit a gambit, but usually test elements like memory and problem solving, but again are still thematic to the game's core concepts. Things like trying to figure out who this fake ID truly belongs to in a lineup of a database, or hot-wiring a car to return it to the car dealership after payments weren't hit. So, with these minigames, do they do enough to change things up and challenge you? Yes and no. It's a gambit of different skills that it tests, and some of them do well even after hours in the game. The polygraph one is a good example. Even in the later game, I had to really stop and think of the questions that it was giving me. You're supposed to lie to calibrate the machine, and some of these questions really catch you in knowing that you have to lie as opposed to answering the truth. Like, you want to just answer the truth most of the time and have to stop yourself. However, on the flip side, some of them are a little clunky to understand at first, like how to tell the VCR tuning element. Sure, the game does have a particular place where you can practice this minigame, but even then, I didn't realize at first how to actually figure it out if I was tuned on that dial or not. I eventually discovered the information by looking really closely, but not after really consistently failing up to that point, and it was just me noticing it as opposed to the game telling me. Then there are the ones I go back and forth on. The lockpicking one, for example. If you play with a mouse and try to beat it, especially the tier 3 one, and don't get lucky with the actual pins, you're going to have a bad time. You just don't have enough speed in order to complete it. But if you use the keyboard one specifically, you can do well, but it almost feels like it's cheating at that point. But it's also one of the only ways to succeed at it. It's also noticeable that sometimes the game gives you patterns with pins in a row, especially with lower lockpicking skill. I like it and I don't. And that's a good synopsis for what I feel about this game. I like it and then I don't. Because I really want to emphasize that a lot of my positives really shine at the first third to first half of the game. Because unfortunately for Rough Justice 84, there's a point in the game where things start to fall apart. And I mean really fall apart. To the point where I was cursing at the game and really hating the experience. If the game would have continued on the path it was going in that first third to half of the game, it would have probably been a game in the high 80s for my main score. But as you'll see, the game falls off a cliff, around the 10 to 15 hour mark in my opinion. First of all, there's bugs. Lots and lots of bugs. Some bugs are obvious. Some bugs, however, aren't really apparent on the surface, and a good amount of them are ones that you will start to question your own sanity or make you think you're not understanding some other mechanic that the game hasn't explained. For example, you'll sit there and wonder with certain agents if they have lost experience after they go home and come back, which is a key mechanic in the game. Higher level agents, especially the ones you trained up from the get-go to get those unique perks, are key to beating the higher level 3 cases on a consistent basis. When looking back on the footage, I did see situations where, yes, the agent did seemingly lose experience or levels when hiring them again. Now, I wish I could show you that, but unfortunately, the choppiness and the frame rate, well, some of that footage is not exactly going to work. But it wasn't every situation. Some of them, no, I just misremembered. And some of them may because I didn't necessarily save. I don't know. But the fact that I'm questioning it should give you an indication that I did feel like something was wrong. Although, devs, why wasn't there an autosave in this game? I really question the purpose of not putting one in. You can automatically save at any point, and manual saves could have happened at any time, so why not just put it in? There's more obvious bugs as well, like a story quest that was completed recently wouldn't seemingly go away at that point. That would seemingly have a cascading effect, as the next accepted story quest would not appear for a little bit, until it magically did. I'm not sure what caused it to appear then, and there were times where I literally couldn't do anything with an agent, like it wouldn't let me. On a completely separate note to the devs, the fact that you couldn't tell an agent to stop their task was really annoying, especially if the time ran out and they were going to a location that wasn't going to mean anything anymore. I don't see the gameplay plus of having them forced to go there. Now, I will fully admit that this may have something to do with the lack of cloud saves for the game, as I did move my game progress from my main PC to the laptop, and a majority of the gameplay was on my laptop. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, but upon looking at the achievements of the game, and knowing full well that, for example, I hired 5 agents, I mean, just look at the screen right now, and realized that I hadn't hired 5 agents on the PC portion of it, something seemingly got messed up there. At least, that's what I'm hoping, because otherwise the game is just really, really buggy. But if it was just bugs, then maybe I would be a little bit more forgiving, as the devs have seemingly pushed a lot of patches since launch. However, the game has structural problems when it comes to the overall picture, in my opinion. Many of the story quests have requirements to unlock, and I have a bone to pick with VJ selection. Those are the ones where you have to find and capture a criminal. The quests themselves aren't bad, but the bigger problem is simple. You can only select one at a time. See this menu? It says 4 available, and there are, but you can only select one of them. So what's the problem, Dragnix? Well, when every other caseworker gives a series of quests, and you don't want to be wasting your time with your other agents while you're trying to focus on getting the requirement for the story quest to go away, then you're sitting there cursing the game, especially when you fail on a really bad dice roll on VJ's quest. Your first instinct is always going to be to use your agents. Time is money after all, and well then having to wait for the right agent to become available to take on that accepted mission because you know it's going to be something ridiculous in terms of the actual requirement, it got me irrationally upset at times and extended the game's life a little bit too much. At the halfway point of the game, from a story perspective, the game really starts to become a chore because you start to pick up some of the tricks and themes the game starts to throw at you, and it starts to make things a bit trivial. For example, with a lot of the Morse code missions, you'll realize that the game is throwing out terms of the 80s era, specifically from pop culture, like Voltron or G.I. Joe. If you can make this connection early on, then you will start to realize that you can guess some of the terms even without hearing the rest of the message, which can feel great when it happens and seemingly is a plus, except that it becomes such a regular thing and doesn't throw a curveball at all, where it really doesn't even start to challenge you. Agent management also just feels a little haphazard with 5 agents, and at some point, I stopped caring about requirements, to be honest with you. I could unlock enough gear slots on every agent where they could have items that filled in gaps on their character, so no specific agent was needed. Furthermore, when some of the tasks ended up being ones that I could easily complete, like the hot wiring one, it just felt like the game ran out of tricks, and yet wanted me to continue on like nothing had happened. I know with some people that more content can be a plus, but here I really felt like the game got stretched way too thin. But when things start to feel like a chore, it's this mid to late game where the game can't even stay consistent with its themes and its gameplay, and it starts to show. Like earlier in the video, I said that the original characters that you come across really feel of the era and really help immerse you in the game. And that still happens in some of the second and third waves, but it starts to become a little inconsistent. Like, the game starts to introduce characters that were obvious icons of the time with very similar sounding names. The Ripley character here looks like the star of Alien, and yeah, she really does add to the overall atmosphere. Then there's Bill from Bill and Ted, and he looks right, but that's when you hear his voice and start to wonder if they ran out of the voice acting budget, because quite frankly, he doesn't sound like Bill at all. The voice acting in whole is up and down. Some of the voices are really good. Some of them, I question. Just take a listen and hear what I'm talking about.
Up the ladder he can take us. With a little luck, that mook will know where the drugs are being produced.
Completed. We need your support on this security contract. Rolling out.
Destination reached.
We're going to need some security personnel.
On it.
Vehicle located.
This is a top priority security contract.
I'm on my way.
But then there's this guy, Big Chungus. Look, I may be a little bit serious, and I get it. Meme culture. It's a way to get virality from someone playing the game by sharing it on Twitter or something. On the surface, it's a smart move. But you know what it did for me? It took me completely out of the game at that point. part of this game's strength was getting into a rhythm of role-playing as an 80s agency, and the realism that came with it. This kind of thing jolts you out of it, and maybe I'm being a little harsh, but it makes me wonder, why? Why do this? And I really want to emphasize the two halves, especially from the story. You start off the game trying to rid the world of a biker gang, and that leads to a revelation that they are being controlled by another big entity. They weren't just peddling drugs, they were being sort of forced, not really, but forced to do it. And it may have had something to do with your arrest. You meet characters like a DA that's a little bit too gung-ho, and you start to question things and alliances. The mystery is there, and the writing, it does have a flaw or two in this opening element, but overall, it really makes you appreciate the 80s aesthetic and the cop story that plays out. I was all in. But then a particular bombshell is dropped with a certain plot reveal that I won't spoil here, but I'll do a generic description of. Basically, this group is indicated to be involved in the overall plot, and it comes really out of left field. Like, yes, this group, historically, there were elements of this group during the time, and it is a story that could be told with it. But looking at the group, I felt like several other different groups could have taken the place of this group, made as much sense for the story being told, and wouldn't be so jarring. It took me out of the immersion of the role-playing of the experience, and that was a key part of what was holding the game together for me, even when other elements were starting to drag on. Now, it felt like a personal story, and maybe that's part of it, but it didn't work for me, and actually started to detract from everything around it. What makes this game difficult to fully score the game is that a lot of my big complaints, the length of the mid-game and repetition in particular, could have been a result of some bugs I ran across. I'll be frank, I didn't see those bugs at first, and they seemed to enhance when I moved my save data from the main PC to my laptop. And I don't know if any of that process may have affected things. It doesn't with 99% of the games I play, but it could have here. I can't say that I didn't enjoy the mini games and managing my crew from a strategy element, but I also don't know how badly the bugs ended up extending my experience in the overall picture to the point where some of my complaints may have actually been fixed because of it, if it was actually working at the time. But I can only go off what I experienced, and what I did was a game that was strong to start, but bad to finish. The story rushed to its ending despite the drawn-out gameplay. The bugs kept on interfering with my enjoyment of reasonable gameplay elements, and I was left wanting more and less at the same time. It's definitely a game that a niche audience is going to love, even with its flaws, but for most, it's a game to pick up on sale. That's why it gets a 71 out of 100, making it a buy for players who love the genre and the niche, but for others, it's one to pick up on sale. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and tries to match a game with you. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. And you'll notice that this one has a lot of enhancers and dehancers because, well, I could see this working well for a lot of people and really hating it for others. Thus, my enhancer system comes into play. That's it for this review, and I apologize. I try to get a review done every 2 weeks, but I wanted a little bit more time with this one. The fact is, I would like to hear your feedback, so leave it in the comment section below, and if you like this video, hit a like and maybe share this review with a friend. Coming up next on the channel is a review of Hunt the Night, but until then, keep on gaming.